Yo, what's going on, OCDers? This is Brian, also known as OCD Mindful, back with another video. I've had a few requests to make a video about this topic. I will admit that I listened to this podcast probably around when it first came out on the OCD stories, and a few people emailed me probably around that same time when it came out to ask me my thoughts on it. But I have delved in further as of late because there's been a lot of YouTube comments and a lot of people writing me recently based on me talking about it a little bit in a past video. And so I want to go through some of this stuff, what is called Rumination Focused ERP. And I have my laptop up just to kind of read through some of the articles and discuss and to give you my views on it. And so this is a sort of really drastically new idea in the sense that the therapist Michael Greenberg, who has come up with this method, is of the belief that human beings do not habituate to anxiety. And so classical ERP, the way it's kind of been researched and carried out for 30 to 40 years, has been getting that point wrong. And he believes the cornerstone of all of your anxiety is you ruminating, is rumination. And that basically by eliminating rumination altogether, you eliminate anxiety altogether. Okay? Now, right off the bat, I don't buy that claim. Okay? As someone who's been going through this for a long time, I personally was taught, and I read it in several OCD books when I first had OCD, that rumination is a ritual. And so if you are in fact ruminating, then you are not doing ritual prevention. You are engaging in a ritual. And so to come out, the title of his first OCD Stories podcast was called Rumination is a Ritual, as if this was some brand new idea, some novel, groundbreaking idea. I don't know, maybe a bunch of therapists aren't talking about it. Maybe they're not telling their clients, hey, we don't want to ruminate. That's a ritual, so we're not going to do that. And so if that's already part of classical OCD treatment, classical ERP, not ruminating, yet people are engaging, if they're doing exposures correctly and they're engaging in exposures, but they are feeling anxiety, his claim is they must be ruminating. Okay, I think I could rattle off a billion examples of feeling anxious, having a fight or flight response while not ruminating, while not trying to solve anything. And he goes specifically in one of his articles to say ruminating just means trying to solve a problem. Okay, which is different from just thinking. A lot of us just are thinking a lot. OCD people tend to just think. I always had a habit of talking to myself, especially when I'm driving. And so as long as I'm not solving it, according to one of his articles here, then that's not rumination. Okay, some of my back and forths on YouTube and with some of the people emailing me seem to be saying something very differently than that. They're saying as soon as it's anything more than an instantaneous thought that we have no control over, as soon as you spend 1 second thinking about it, then you're ruminating, according to Michael Greenberg. But he says in one of his articles, it's not ruminating unless you're trying to solve something. So what do you call it if I'm just, I don't know, I'm driving down the road and I'm talking to myself just about anything, you know? What if I'm just talking to myself about what my game plan is for my weekend? or pretending that I'm having a conversation with someone, which is something that I do all the time. Is that rumination or not? I would actually call that rumination. But so for the people who aren't working directly with Michael Greenberg, I think it's probably worth rereading some of these articles and really figuring out exactly what he means by rumination. Okay, so I'm just going to read through some of these points. This video may go long, but I think it's pretty important because really this is a completely different spin on treatment. The other point I want to make before jumping into this is research has shown that there's about an 85% success rate with classical ERP. So for someone to come around and say, like, this old model isn't working with an 85% success rate really begs the question why. It is also noted at the top of every one of his articles that Rumination Focused ERP is a new and evolving approach to ERP. It has not yet been researched, and therefore, to the extent that it differs from classical ERP, it is not evidence-based. Okay, that's fine. I mean, a million things that I subscribe to through the mindfulness teachings that I've learned over the years aren't really evidence-based. A lot of this stuff is you try stuff for yourself and see if it works. And I will also say this, if you're trying this and you're doing it in a way that you understand and you're feeling better, by all means, do that. Definitely do that. The suggestion that you won't feel anxiety when doing an exposure is definitely much more tempting than classical ERP, which says, hey, we're intentionally going to go flare up our anxiety. We're going to have an attitude of come and get me, bring it on, give me a level 10 anxiety, give it to me as much as you can because I'm going to learn how to take it. That's very tough. So if Greenberg is saying we're having a 0 to 1 out of a scale of 0 to 10 on our anxiety level, and he wants us to be at 0 to 1, and that's where it's going to be the whole time, then yeah, I think that's an amazing thing. But again, this entire methodology that he's come up with here is hinging off of the idea that habituation doesn't work. And instead, it's based on what he calls learning. And he does admit in another OCD video where he's talking to a bunch of other OCD therapists that like he needs to go in and clean some of this up because there is confusion. And there is confusion. I'm confused on some of it because when he says learning, in one area he's saying we can learn that we don't have to, that we can engage in any behavior that we would normally avoid because of our OCD. Okay, that's fine. That's also taught in classical OCD. As an HOCD exposure, it was recommended to me to just like go hang out at a gay bar, drink beers and talk to gay guys. And while I normally would want to avoid that, I did the exposure and I learned from the exposure, okay, I can do that. I don't need to avoid a situation like that, which means I don't need to avoid seeing gay people at a party or having conversations with gay people anywhere. So there's that learning, the learning that, sure, I can do this and I can tolerate it. I don't need to be afraid of it. But then he says something else about learning in one of his articles, and I don't know if I can just find it right here off the and there's actually a lot of articles here on his website. I'd encourage you all to read it if you're interested. He's talking about a condition where people have OCD that they're afraid they're going to vomit. And so his treatment is, okay, we're not going to ruminate at all about it. And what you're going to learn is, and he says this, that you don't vomit. He says essentially learning that the fear doesn't come true. Okay, this gets a little confusing to me too, because if he's saying rumination means trying to solve something, but then by not ruminating, we figure out we figured it out anyway. And in classical ERP, figuring out, learning that your fear isn't true, learning that your OCD fear isn't true, is like number one rule. Don't do that. Don't do that. That is ritual number one, is trying to figure out that your fear is not true. Okay, so there's another area that I'm a little confused about. But I agree with the learning aspect of ERP as long as you're learning that you don't need to avoid any situation. You're learning that you can tolerate uncertainty. You're learning that you can tolerate any feelings that come up that are associated with OCD. Interestingly, he speaks only about the symptom of anxiety. And yes, most people with OCD experience anxiety, but there are a lot of people who their main emotion is not anxiety. It could be shame. People with contamination could feel disgust. Okay, so I would assume what he means is as long as you're not ruminating, none of those emotions show up. He may say that in one of his articles. Maybe I missed it, but I didn't see anything like that. So let's see here. Let me just pull up one of these articles. Okay, Rumination Focused Case Conceptualization. Okay. An effective treatment plan starts with an accurate understanding of what's causing the problem, also known as a case conceptualization. Rumination Focused ERP views rumination as the cornerstone of OCD and therefore starts with a case conceptualization that includes the role of rumination. Here are a few examples. Contamination. Ruminating about paying attention. All right, so it says ruminating about, and then in parentheses, paying attention to, keeping track of what is contaminated generates a subjective experience of contamination. Okay, now this is in contrast with what he says rumination actually is. Just paying attention to, or I guess keeping track of, could be another way of saying solving, but it's not. That's not solving. Keeping track of something doesn't necessarily mean you're trying to solve it, and paying attention to also doesn't mean solve it. All right, so that was for contamination. Next one, he says intrusive thoughts, pure O, which so many of us have. When people say they're struggling with intrusive thoughts, they are actually struggling with rumination. 1, ruminating about trying to solve a problem keeps the problem in mind. 2, if a person gets stuck ruminating and consequently feeling anxious every time they're reminded of a problem, they become afraid to be reminded of it. Okay, so again there he's pinpointing trying to solve as ruminating, and also making the claim that as long as you're ruminating, you're feeling anxious, and if you're not ruminating, you're not feeling anxious. I would ask you personally to think about your own OCD and ask yourself, and if it is the case that you are only feeling anxious when you're ruminating, then yeah, let's be really careful to not ruminate. That already is known as a ritual. So if you're doing it and you're maybe not aware of it, I think it's good that Michael Greenberg is emphasizing the point. But to me, that's really not any different than emphasizing any other rituals, right? To have a podcast that says rumination is a ritual as if that's a new idea, to me is no different than it saying wishing is a ritual or checking is a ritual. I know for me personally and for a lot of people that I've worked with, checking is just as much, if not more, of a ritual for people than trying to solve. A lot of people with their OCD are checking to see if they've made progress. They're sort of peeking around to check to see if that last exposure got them anxious or not. They're checking to see if they feel like they did before they had OCD in the first place. There's always this mental checking going on. Do I feel okay today? What level has my OCD been at? Did I have a good week? How much longer is this going to be until I'm solved, until I'm cured? And so that's something I do more than ruminating to try to solve the problem. It was just this sort of checking, this inner dialogue that was running, which again, I'd place in the same basket as ruminating. All right, so let's move on. There's definitely one article that I was hoping to pinpoint. All right, so there's an article here called Understanding Pure O. You are not having intrusive thoughts all day. You are ruminating. Okay. Most people with intrusive thoughts, often referred to as pure O, and most people who treat intrusive thoughts think that these thoughts are involuntary and uncontrollable. Okay. Let me read on before I give my take on that. The truth is that the vast majority of what people call intrusive thoughts, almost all of them, are actually being thought or imagined on purpose in an effort to prevent something bad from happening. I agree with that. Here's an example of how this typically plays out in someone with OCD. A person sees a knife near someone they love, and it occurs to them that they could stab that person with the knife. This terrifies the person. What if they really did stab them? So what does the person do? They try to figure out if they would actually do it. In order to figure this out, they purposely imagine stabbing their loved ones in order to gauge their emotional response. Definitely people do that. And when they aren't 100% sure what their response was, they imagine it again. Then they might imagine doing it another way or start thinking about other violent ideas to gauge their response to those. I definitely think that a lot of people who aren't in treatment for OCD and who don't have a therapist that's making sure that they're not ritualizing in their mind all the time are doing that. At this point, they are repeatedly imagining stabbing someone, not even realizing that they are doing it on purpose. I agree with that too. You can drop that. Okay, again, it's a ritual that there's not a lot of controversy as to the idea that there's thoughts and there's thinking. We don't have control over our thoughts, and we do have control over our thinking. This to me seems like a kind of long-winded way of saying that. This person will say they are experiencing intrusive thoughts all day. They don't realize that the majority of these intrusive thoughts are actually thought experiments that they are constantly running in their mind. In other words, this isn't automatic thinking that they can't control. It's analytical thinking that they are directing towards figuring out if they might actually stab someone. Yes, I think a lot of people are doing that. I think Classical ERP addresses it, and it would probably be good for any therapist to be a little bit more adamant about not ruminating. I will also say there are tons of people that are, again, he's talking about solving it here. His idea of rumination here, he's being specific, is solving it, trying to figure it out. What if instead I'm thinking in a way that isn't trying to solve it? What if I'm just thinking, oh my God, if I stab this person, what does that mean about me? Am I an evil person? Maybe I've always been an evil person. I don't like this feeling. Those are all also thinking. Those are all things that we do have the power to drop too. Are they rumination? I would say that they are. It's not clear to me yet whether that type of thing is considered rumination by Greenberg or not, but it does seem to be that wouldn't be what he would consider rumination. The initial moment when it occurs to the person that they could stab their loved one is the actual intrusive thought or obsession. How long does it last? A millisecond. It's instantaneous. Everything that follows that flash of fear is compulsive mental checking, also known as compulsive rumination. Okay, there I agree with him. Now he's back to just saying like anything, any kind of thinking that happens after the initial thought is rumination. I like that better. I prefer not to use the term intrusive thoughts at all because it fails to differentiate between the thought that occurs to the person and the analytical thinking that follows it. For the same reason, the popular advice to let thoughts be there can be extremely harmful and misleading. Yeah, I think when I say something like let thoughts be there, that's exactly what I mean is let that thought come up and don't do anything with it. Let it be there unanswered, unfigured out, unsolved. Doesn't mean let it be there and keep looking at it. As explained in rumination is a compulsion, not an obsession, and that means you have to stop. The fact that rumination is a compulsion means that it will not go away on its own as a result of treatment. Rather, the patient must eliminate it as part of the treatment. Again, that there is nothing new about that. We need to teach people with OCD and other people who ruminate that they actually do have control over this thought process, and that even though it's scary to stop, doing so is an essential step towards getting better. To learn more about how to stop ruminating, please check this article called How to Stop Ruminating. Okay, again, I agree with the sentiment. Ruminating is bad. We should always be on guard for when we're ruminating. To me, not only is this not new in OCD treatment, this is like the stuff that I learned on my very first 8-week MBSR course at the University of Pennsylvania. Like probably our first guided meditation, or at least one of the first ones, was to recognize when a thought pops up automatically and then to literally drop the thought. Try our best to just drop the thought and not engage in it anymore. Okay, this has been being practiced for thousands of years. All right. Okay, look, here's the part where he talks specifically about this solving the problem thing. I'm in the process of writing a more thorough manual about how to stop ruminating, but I wanted to make a bare bones version available in the meantime. Here's the basic exercise I use to teach people how to stop ruminating. Identify a problem that you usually ruminate about. Your job is not to try to solve that problem. Do not try to push it out of your mind or forget about it. Don't actively try to keep it in your mind either. It can be there or not be there. It doesn't matter. Your only job is to not try to solve it. Okay, so for the people that have been debating back and forth on their YouTube comments, it seems to me you've missed this point completely. If your only job is not to try to solve it, that means you can be thinking about all kinds of things, which I would still say, try not to do. Try to take whatever thought comes up, drop it, and don't entertain it, especially if it's in the realm or you think it might be in the realm of an OCD thought that's unanswerable in the first place. Okay, if you were able to do this, awesome. This is what it means not to ruminate. It doesn't mean you forget about the problem. It means you stop trying to solve it. Since you've now shown yourself that you are able to stop ruminating, if there are times in the future when you feel like you can't, it'll probably be because you're justifying it. Remember that I missed something there. Remember that you do know how to stop, and you just need to make a clear decision to do so. I agree with that. And again, it's nothing new. We know that thoughts are automatic. Thinking, we do have some control over. If you had trouble with this exercise, what follows is a list of problems people most frequently encounter and a brief explanation of what to do about each one. If you feel like you are working hard or feel anxious throughout this exercise, there's probably something wrong with your approach, and you should consult the list below. Okay, examples here. It keeps popping into my mind. That's fine. It can pop in or even just stay there. That's not a problem. The problem is trying to solve it. If it pops in, just refrain from trying to solve it. Okay, I agree. Don't try to solve it. I would also say don't even actively think about it. Don't engage in it. Don't tell yourself a negative story about it. Don't consider yourself doomed for eternity because you've had this automatic thought. And again, I would say that all of those things are ruminating. Ruminating is more than just trying to solve it. I was able to stop, but it was really hard. I don't know if I could keep this up all the time. Sounds like you're imagining that if you don't hold it back, the rumination will come flooding in. It won't. Rumination doesn't happen to you. You do it. Agreed. Think of this like stepping off a treadmill, not holding back floodwaters. I keep trying to think about other things, but it's still there. You don't need to actively try to distract yourself by thinking about other things. If I asked you to stop solving a math problem, you wouldn't try to distract yourself. You would just stop. Do the same thing here. Okay, I agree. For a lot of people who rumination is their like main ritual, though, it isn't just that easy to stop. It takes practice. The mindfulness meditations that I did were, like I said, specifically about watching what was going on mentally in my head and practicing. Like I would literally imagine that thought on a rock, and I would drop the rock down a cliff, and then it'd just be gone. And if it popped back up, I would continue to do it. But guess what? In the beginning, it pops up all the time. It pops up all the time, and me wanting to engage in it or even solve it, there's an instinct for that. So it takes practice to break that in my mind. Okay. I keep thinking about how to stop solving it, or I keep thinking about how to stop solving it, or I keep worrying that I'm ruminating. Stop trying to figure out how to stop. That's rumination 2. Yeah, according to him, I agree. That's a solving thing. That's rumination 2. If the thought occurs to you that you might be doing it wrong, treat that the same way as the original problem. Don't try to solve it. Perfectly agree with that. Perfectly agree with that. And I agree with that across the board for ERP. If there's some other concern or obsession that pops up in your treatment and you feel like you need to solve that or get an answer to that or check that or wish it to be different or any of these rituals, treat it the same way. I don't need to do anything with it. maybe not, maybe it's real, maybe it's not. I'm going to make the choice to drop it and not spend another second engaging with it. Okay, the next one is, I'm not trying to figure it out exactly, but I can't stop seeing disturbing images or scenes. Except in very unusual circumstances, you can't really visualize something clearly for a long time without doing so on purpose. I agree with that too. The most visualizing that can happen outside your control is a vague image occurring to you for a brief moment. Yeah, I agree, unless you're actively trying to conjure it up. You are probably visualizing these things on purpose in an effort to figure something out, e.g., by checking your response to the images. Okay, I'm fine with that. I still felt uneasy, or any other way. That's okay, that doesn't mean you're ruminating. Don't try to control your feelings, control your thinking. Okay, I agree with that too, but I also disagree with just because you're not ruminating means you're not going to have anxiety, and that sort of runs completely counter to that idea. In fact, when he goes specifically to talk about how he performs ERP, he intentionally makes sure that the client is on a 0 to 1 out of a scale of 0 to 10 before they even do the exposure. So, I mean, really, this is contradictory. Don't try to control your feelings, he says right here. Okay, then why are you trying to control the feelings of someone before they're doing an ERP? Okay, next example, I got upset whenever it comes back into my mind. That makes sense. Since this is a problem that upsets you, being upset about this problem doesn't mean you're ruminating. In fact, you'll probably be reminded of this problem often, and you may feel upset for a moment or even longer. Your job is to refrain from trying to solve it anyway. Don't try to control your feelings, control your thinking. I totally agree with that, okay? He has contradicted himself in other spots there. These are the problems people have most frequently. These are the problems people have most frequently when learning how to stop ruminating. There are some additional problems that people frequently encounter when they try to eliminate rumination at all times. Okay. All right, guys, I don't want this video to go on forever. Maybe I'll make a part 2. The basic gist of this is, yeah, his contention is we don't habituate to anxiety. He makes the admission here that none of this is evidence-based. He hasn't done any studies. In the one podcast he did with a bunch of OCD therapists, he even said he really doesn't have any interest in writing anything right now or doing any research right now. That's not a great sign to me. Again, the fact that classical ERP has such a success rate, that there is such overwhelming consensus on habituation to anxiety, my own personal experience, I definitely habituated to anxiety. My other own personal experience is I got very good at not ruminating and I still felt anxious. So I'm not sure where this claim is even coming from. And I mean, like, think about just how many instinctive things happen to you where your anxiety goes up. People without OCD or even without anxiety conditions get anxiety. It is a normal fight or flight response. It does not have to be because you're trying to solve something specifically. Okay, I use this example in one of my comments back and forth on YouTube, was like, if I see a lion all of a sudden and I'm out, and I don't have a car or anywhere to go and I'm on foot and I'm running from a lion, I'm not actively trying to solve anything. I'm running from a lion. I'm probably not thinking at all, and my anxiety will be through the roof. When you're driving down your car and you see police lights come on behind you, even just in your personal relationships, if a friend or a loved one came up to you and said, I can't believe that you did what you did. If you have no idea what they're talking about, you might even be feeling it right now, me just saying it as an example. You feel anxious. And there is no active rumination going on right there. Okay, so my take on it would be, I don't think there's a problem with really emphasizing not ruminating. I think you should definitely not be ruminating during any exposures. I do not think that is anything new. I think that he's emphasizing it a little bit more. I also would like to emphasize that you shouldn't be checking. You shouldn't be comparing. You shouldn't be wishing. You shouldn't be looking into the past or looking into the future to see how you were on any given day. All of these things, I would say, are mental compulsions. Let's really be good about not doing any of them during exposures. I'm not sold on the idea that by not ruminating, you're just not feeling anxiety. I'm also not sold on the idea that rumination just means trying to solve something. I definitely think a lot. It's something that, even with my mindfulness practice, I'm very good at catching it now and dropping it, but it's very instinctive for me to want to be thinking. And most of that thinking does not involve trying to solve anything. It's just sort of overactive thinking. And I'm willing to bet most of you are like that too. So I do practice dropping all of that, whether I'm trying to solve anything or not. Anyway, I would do this. If you're not working with a therapist and you want to start trying to do something on your own, use this approach. Go ahead and use it. Like, do your exposures and being very cautious about doing any mental rituals while you're doing them. And if that means you have lower anxiety while doing it, that's fine. The downside could be if habituation actually is the mechanism that helps treat OCD and we're not even raising our anxiety at all, or you're not experiencing any anxiety during your exposures, then it may not be benefiting you that well. But definitely try it as a first attempt, or if you've been trying classical ERP on your own, and my guess is you're probably, if you're not getting better, you're probably missing something. But I don't know. Or if you are seeing a therapist, ask them what their thoughts are on it. It's definitely interesting. He's definitely the first person to come out with something that's pretty drastically different than the classical model of it. I think a lot of the things that he's claiming are new ideas are not new ideas. And I'm not sold on some of the other methods that he's using here. Anyway, guys, sorry, 32-minute video. Ozzy, I know it's boring. These aren't my, my funny 30-second TikTok videos. But this stuff is very important to me. And it's personal to me, too. So I do want to make sure everyone is getting the best treatment. Feel free to leave a comment. Shoot me an email if you want. I'm at ocdmindful@gmail.com. And I'll catch you next time.